My mother waited until everyone had raised their glasses before telling the room what kind of son I was. "Some people show up when family needs them," she said, looking directly at me. "And some people stay away until there's something left to collect." Nobody spoke. My younger brother lowered his eyes. My aunt stopped cutting the birthday cake. Even the waiter standing behind my chair took one slow step backward. Mom smiled and added, "You know what you did, Daniel." The worst part was that everyone else thought they knew too. They believed I had abandoned my father while he was dying. For almost 3 years, I had believed it myself. Then, at 11:43 that night, my father's old phone turned on, and the first message on the screen was addressed to me. The dinner was supposed to celebrate my mother's 65th birthday. She had chosen a private room at an Italian restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place with white tablecloths and family photographs framed along the walls. There were 18 people at the table. I had not seen most of them since Dad's funeral. My invitation arrived 6 days before the dinner. No personal note, no phone call, just a printed card with my mother's handwriting on the envelope. "Daniel, it is time to stop hiding." I almost threw it away. Instead, I placed it beside the stack of unopened mail on my kitchen counter and stared at it every morning before work. For 3 years, I had imagined what I would say if I ever sat across from my mother again. None of those imagined conversations began with an accusation over birthday cake. "I didn't come here to argue," I said. Mom rested one hand beside her plate. She wore the pearl earrings Dad had bought her for their 30th anniversary. "You never come anywhere to argue," she replied. "You just leave." My brother Ryan shifted in his chair. "Mom, maybe not tonight." She turned toward him. "Why not tonight? We've spent 3 years protecting him." Protecting me. That was the word she used. Not blaming, not punishing, protecting. My Aunt Linda reached for the wine bottle, then seemed to change her mind. "Daniel drove 2 hours to be here," she said quietly. Mom gave a small laugh. "His father waited much longer than 2 hours." There it was. The sentence everyone had been waiting for. My father died at Riverside Hospital on a Thursday morning in March. I found out 12 hours later through a message from Ryan. Not from Mom, not from a doctor, not from anyone who had been sitting beside his bed. Ryan's message contained 7 words. "Dad passed this morning. Call me when you can." I called immediately. Mom answered his phone. Her voice was flat. "He asked for you," she said. "Right at the end." I remember gripping the edge of my desk so hard my fingers hurt. No one told me he was worse. "We called." "No, you didn't." "He left messages." I checked my phone while she was still speaking. There were no missed calls, no voicemails, nothing. Mom went silent for a moment. Then she said the words that followed me for 3 years. "Maybe you blocked him and forgot." I had changed phones 2 months earlier after dropping mine in a parking lot. I had transferred my contacts, but not every setting. For weeks, I searched old accounts and cloud backups. I contacted my phone provider. I checked blocked numbers. Dad's number was not there. But grief does strange things to certainty. Eventually, I started wondering whether I had made some mistake I could no longer prove. Maybe the calls had failed. Maybe the messages had gone to the old phone. Maybe I had been too distracted by work, my divorce, and my own stubborn silence to notice that my father was trying to reach me. Mom never let me forget that possibility. Neither did the rest of the family. After her toast, dinner continued in broken pieces. Forks scraped plates. People discussed traffic, someone's new roof, and my cousin's dental surgery. No one looked at me for long. I sat with a slice of untouched cake in front of me. White frosting, raspberry filling. The same flavor Dad used to buy for every birthday because Mom claimed she did not like chocolate. She ate chocolate whenever he was not around. That was the kind of detail Dad used to notice. He noticed everything about her. With me, he often waited too long to say what mattered. Our last conversation had been 6 months before he died. We argued in his driveway. He had asked me to apologize to Ryan after Ryan borrowed money from me and lied about when he would return it. "It's not about the money," Dad said. "It's never about the money when it's mine." "He's struggling." So was I. Dad folded his arms. "You always have to make everything a test. And Ryan always passes without showing up." Dad looked toward the house where Mom was watching us through the living room window. Then he said, "Go home, Daniel." So I did. I waited for him to call. He apparently waited for me. Neither of us moved first. That was our mistake. But I never believed it would become the family's final version of me, the son who walked away. When dinner ended, people hugged Mom near the door. She accepted gifts and thanked everyone with the warm voice she had not used with me. I waited until the room had almost emptied. "Why did you invite me?" I asked. Mom placed a birthday card into a large paper bag. "Because the house is being sold." I stared at her. "What house?" She finally looked up. "My house, Daniel." "You're selling Dad's house?" "It was my house too." I didn't say it wasn't. "The closing is in 2 weeks. Ryan and I have already cleared most of it." Ryan stood near the wall, holding 3 gift bags. He looked uncomfortable. "You already cleared it?" I asked him. "Mostly." "What happened to Dad's things?" Mom picked up her coat. Anything important was divided between people who were present at the end. She walked past me before I could answer. Ryan stayed behind. For a few seconds, he stared at the floor. Then he reached into one of the gift bags and pulled out a small black rectangle. My father's phone. The screen was cracked across one corner. I recognized the faded sticker on the back from the auto parts store where he had worked for 37 years. "Mom told me to throw it away," Ryan said. "Why didn't you?" He rubbed his thumb along the edge. "I don't know." He held it out, but when I reached for it, he did not release it immediately. "There's something else," he said. "What?" "I found it in Dad's nightstand with his hospital bracelet wrapped around it." My throat tightened. The bracelet was still there. White plastic. His name printed in black letters. Thomas Mercer. Underneath it was the date he had been admitted. Ryan lowered his voice. "Mom said the phone had been dead since before he went to the hospital." "Was it?" "I plugged it in this afternoon." I looked at him. "And?" It turned on. The restaurant staff were stacking chairs around us now. From the hallway, Mom called Ryan's name. He pushed the phone into my hand. "Don't open it here." "Why?" He glanced toward the doorway. Then he said something I had not expected. "Because Mom lied about when she found it." Before I could ask another question, he picked up the gift bags and walked away. I drove home with the phone on the passenger seat. At every red light, I looked at it. The hospital bracelet was wrapped twice around the case. I could not bring myself to remove it. At 11:41, I sat alone at my kitchen table and connected the phone to a charger. Nothing happened. I waited. The screen remained black. I almost laughed at myself. 3 years of guilt, and now I was sitting in the dark, expecting a dead phone to explain my father. Then the screen flashed. The battery symbol appeared. At 11:43, the phone vibrated against the table. There were 9 unsent text messages, all addressed to my number. The first one was dated 4 days before Dad died. I opened it. "Daniel, your mother says you don't want to come. I need to hear that from you." Then another notification appeared, a saved voicemail. Recorded at Riverside Hospital, I pressed play. For several seconds, there was only the sound of my father breathing. Then he whispered my name. And in the background, I heard my mother say, "Thomas, give me the phone." I replayed the voicemail 6 times before I noticed something that had nothing to do with my father's voice. There was a pause. Not silence. A pause, like someone had covered the microphone with their hand. Then my mother's voice came through again, farther away this time. "Thomas, the nurse will be back." My father answered so quietly, I almost missed it. "I need to call my son." The recording ended. No goodbye. No explanation. Just the sound of the phone being taken away. I sat at my kitchen table until almost 2 in the morning, listening to those 23 seconds over and over. For 3 years, I had carried the weight of one sentence. He asked for you. Now I couldn't stop wondering whether he had spent those last days trying to reach me while someone else decided he shouldn't. The next morning, I called Ryan. He answered on the second ring. "You listened to it." "I did." He didn't sound surprised. "I thought you would." "When exactly did you find Dad's phone?" There was a long pause. "About 6 months after the funeral." "You've had it that long?" "I found it in the back of Mom's dresser." "Dresser?" "I was helping her move furniture." "Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to." "So what stopped you?" He exhaled slowly. "Mom." I leaned back in my chair. "What did she say?" "She told me Dad kept talking about you because he was confused from the medication." I closed my eyes. "And you believed her?" "I wanted to." Ryan had always wanted peace more than answers. "When we were kids, he apologized even when I was the one who got into trouble. If our parents argued, he disappeared into his room with headphones on. I did the opposite. I asked questions. Dad used to say that one of us inherited his patience. The other inherited his stubbornness. He wasn't wrong." "I found something else," Ryan finally said. "What?" "A notebook." "What kind of notebook?" "The one Dad kept beside his recliner." I remembered it immediately. Every evening after dinner, Dad would sit in the same chair near the living room window. He wrote grocery lists, oil changes, birthdays, random thoughts. Nothing dramatic, just everyday life. "What happened to it?" Ryan hesitated. "Mom threw it away." "She threw away his notebook?" "That's what she said." "You don't believe her?" "No." "Why?" "Because I looked in the trash the next morning. And it wasn't there." I stood up so quickly my coffee spilled across the counter. Everything until now could still have been explained away. Misunderstandings, bad timing, grief. But people don't lie about throwing something away unless they don't want someone else reading it. Saturday afternoon, I drove to my parents' house, or what used to be my parents' house. The for sale sign leaned slightly toward the street. The flower beds Dad watered every weekend were overgrown. One upstairs window stood open. Mom's SUV was gone. Ryan had texted me the garage code before I left. "She's at your aunt's until dinner. You have about an hour." I hated sneaking into the place where I'd grown up. But for the first time in years, I wasn't there to argue. I was there to understand. The house felt smaller than I remembered. The hallway still smelled faintly like lemon furniture polish. Dad's recliner was gone. The family photos above the fireplace had been taken down. Only lighter rectangles remained on the wall. I walked into his old study. Empty bookshelves, empty desk, empty closet. Everything looked staged, as if someone had carefully erased the person who used to live there. I opened desk drawers one by one. Receipts, pens that no longer worked, rubber bands, nothing important. Then I noticed the calendar still hanging beside the window. March, 3 years ago. No one had turned the page. The square for Monday had one sentence written in Dad's handwriting. Daniel said he'll call after work. I stared at it. I never made that call. Because we argued that morning. But he had still written it down, like he expected me to. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned. Ryan stood in the doorway. "You found the calendar. I didn't know you were coming." I got worried. He stepped inside. "I've been thinking." "About? What if Mom really believed she was protecting Dad?" I looked at him. "Protecting him from what?" "You." I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it hurt. "I drove him to chemo appointments." "I know." "I fixed his roof." "I know." "I called him every Sunday until those last few months." "I know." Ryan nodded slowly. "I keep remembering things that don't fit." He walked to the closet and tapped the highest shelf. Dad hid birthday presents up there. I climbed onto the old desk. The shelf was almost empty. Almost. My fingers touched a dusty cardboard envelope taped flat against the top. I pulled it down. It was addressed in Dad's handwriting. For Daniel. Neither of us spoke. The envelope had never been sealed. Inside was a folded letter. Only one page. The first line made my stomach tighten. "If you're reading this, then something happened before we had the chance to talk." Ryan looked at me. "Read it." I unfolded the paper with shaking hands. Dad wrote that he had been forgetting little things. Names, appointments, where he left his glasses. His doctors wanted more tests after the cancer treatment. He didn't know what the results would show. Then came the sentence neither of us expected. "Your mother thinks it's better if I don't upset the family by telling you everything. She says you've moved on with your life." I don't believe that. I stopped reading. Ryan whispered, "Keep going." The next paragraph was shorter. "If I ever stop making my own decisions, promise me you won't blame yourself for what happens after that." The letter ended there. No signature, just his initials. T.M. Ryan sank into the desk chair. I've never seen that before. Neither had I. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. There was one more thing inside. A pharmacy receipt, dated 2 weeks before Dad died. At the bottom, someone had written a phone number in blue ink. No name. Just 10 digits. Ryan frowned. "Do you recognize it?" I didn't. But something about the area code felt familiar. Before I could think about it, a car door slammed outside. Ryan looked through the blinds. His face lost all color. "Mom's home." Then he looked back at me and said quietly, "She wasn't supposed to be back for another hour." Ryan didn't wait for me to answer. He grabbed the envelope from my hand, slid it under Dad's old desk blotter and whispered, "Don't let her see it." The front door opened. A second later, I heard my mother's voice. "I thought you were taking those boxes to your car." "I forgot one," Ryan answered before I could move. His voice sounded almost normal, almost. Footsteps crossed the hardwood floor, closer, then stopped outside the study. Mom appeared in the doorway. She looked from Ryan to me without smiling. I thought I made myself clear. I came to say goodbye to the house, I replied. You've had 3 years. She noticed the open desk drawers. So this wasn't about saying goodbye. No. What were you looking for? My father. For the first time that afternoon, her expression changed, only for a second. Then it disappeared. There's nothing left to find. She stepped into the room and began closing the drawers one by one, almost mechanically, as though restoring order mattered more than answering questions. When she reached the last drawer, she stopped. Dinner is at 6, she said to Ryan. You should leave now. Neither of us argued. We walked outside together. Only after we reached our cars did Ryan speak. She knew. Knew what? That we'd been in here. How? I left that bottom drawer open before. I looked back toward the house. The curtain in the living room moved slightly. Mom was watching us. Instead of driving home, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot a few miles away. I took Dad's phone from the passenger seat. There were 9 unsent text messages. I'd only read the first one. The second was dated 2 days later. Ryan says you're busy. That's okay. Just call when you can. The third. Your mom says work is keeping you away. I understand. The fourth message never finished. Something doesn't feel right here. It stopped in the middle of the sentence. No period, no explanation. The fifth message wasn't a text at all. It was a photograph. Dad's hospital room. Nothing unusual at first. A television mounted on the wall, a tray with untouched soup, his reading glasses on the bedside table. Then I noticed the date and time in the corner. It had been taken the afternoon before he died. Someone stood beside the bed. Only their arm was visible, holding Dad's phone. The sleeve belonged to my mother. My own phone rang. Ryan, I forgot to tell you something. I'm listening. Do you remember Dad's neighbor? Mr. Harlan? The one with the beagle? Of course. He called me last month. I frowned. Why? He asked whether you ever got your father's letters. My heart skipped. What letters? I told him I didn't know what he meant. And? He sounded confused. 20 minutes later, I was standing on Mr. Harlan's porch. He had aged. His shoulders were lower, his hair almost completely white. But he recognized me immediately. Daniel. He looked genuinely happy to see me. I've been wondering about you. He invited me inside. His living room smelled like coffee and cedarwood. A baseball game played quietly on the television. I won't keep you long, I said. I just need to ask you something. He nodded. Tom told me you might come one day. I froze. He said that? About a week before he went into the hospital. Mr. Harlan walked to a bookshelf and opened a small drawer. He removed a rubber-banded stack of envelopes. Every one of them had my name written on the front. My father's handwriting. There are 5, Mr. Harlan said. He asked me to mail one every week if he couldn't. I stared at him. You never mailed them? His face filled with confusion. I did. Every single one. A chill ran through me. I never received them. Mr. Harlan slowly sat back down. That's impossible. I moved 2 years before Dad got sick. I know. He looked even more puzzled. I wrote your new address on every envelope while Tom watched. I felt my stomach tighten. You did? He wanted to make sure they reached you. He reached for his glasses. I even drove to the post office myself. I picked up the top envelope. Across the front was my address. Correct. Perfectly correct. On the back was a bright yellow postal sticker. Return to sender. No reason. No forwarding note. Nothing. Every envelope carried the same sticker. None had been opened. Tom cried, Mr. Harlan said quietly. I looked up. The last time I saw him. He thought you'd decided not to answer. My throat closed. I never knew they existed. I believe you. He said it without hesitation. Then he leaned forward. Because your father stopped blaming you long before he died. I drove home with the 5 unopened letters beside me. For almost an hour, I couldn't make myself read them. Instead, I kept hearing Dad's voicemail. I need to call my son. Everything I'd believed was beginning to fall apart. Not because someone had proven my mother hated me, but because someone had carefully built a story that kept my father and me apart during the last weeks of his life. The question was no longer whether that had happened. It was why. That evening, just before sunset, Ryan called again. His voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel, what happened? I was helping Mom pack the hallway closet. And? I found Dad's medical folder. I waited. I think you need to see it. Why? Ryan took a shaky breath. Because there's a page missing. He paused. And I think Mom tore it out on purpose. I met Ryan in the parking lot behind the public library the next morning. He arrived 10 minutes late. He didn't even get out of his truck right away. When he finally walked over, he looked like he hadn't slept. He handed me a plain manila folder. I copied everything before I put it back. You think Mom will notice? She notices everything. I opened the folder. Lab reports. Medication schedules. Discharge instructions that Dad never lived long enough to use. Then I reached the page Ryan had mentioned. Except it wasn't the original. It was a photocopy with a jagged tear running down one side. Someone had taped it back together before copying it. Where did you find this? Behind another document. I looked closer. The missing strip contained handwritten notes from one of Dad's doctors. Most of it was impossible to read, except for one sentence. Patient repeatedly requests contact with oldest son. Family communication appears restricted at bedside. I read it again, then again. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. I searched online. And? The handwriting belongs to the hospital social worker. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Not because we suddenly had all the answers, because we finally had something that wasn't based on memory. It had been written by someone who wasn't part of our family. 3 days later, the closing on the house finally arrived. Mom invited everyone over one last time. She said it was for memories. It felt more like inventory. Furniture wore little colored stickers. Boxes lined the hallway. The living room echoed. Dad's recliner was gone. His tools were gone. Even the dent in the hallway wall where he once dropped a ladder had been patched and painted. As if every trace of him needed to disappear before someone else moved in. Ryan stood near the fireplace. My Aunt Linda unpacked paper plates for sandwiches. Nobody expected a celebration. Mom walked through the rooms, giving everyone instructions. Take whatever reminds you of him, she said. I don't want anything left after today. I watched her for a long moment. Then I asked, Can we talk? She looked annoyed. We're talking. No. Privately. She hesitated, then led me into what used to be Dad's study. The room was almost empty. Only sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor. What is it now? She asked. I placed Dad's phone on the windowsill, then the 5 returned letters. then the copied medical note, one by one. She stared at them. She didn't touch any of them. "You've been busy. I've been looking for the truth. There is no truth that changes what happened." I kept my voice calm. "Did Dad ask to see me?" She folded her arms. "He was very sick." That's not an answer. He wasn't thinking clearly. The social worker thought he was. Her eyes flickered toward the copied page, only for an instant. Then she looked away. I took a slow breath. "Did you tell him I didn't want to come?" Silence. "Did you tell me he stopped asking?" Silence again. Finally, she sat down in the only chair left in the room. For the first time in years, she looked tired instead of angry. "He needed peace. So you answered for me?" He became obsessed with his son, with fixing everything before he died. I swallowed. "What's wrong with that?" She looked toward the empty window. "You weren't speaking. We argued. You always argued. We always came back." He didn't believe that anymore. I felt something inside me give way, not explode, just quietly break. "You made that decision for both of us." She closed her eyes. I couldn't watch him spend every day waiting for a phone that never rang. I didn't know. I know. Her voice cracked for the first time. "I know that now." Neither of us spoke. The silence lasted nearly a minute. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. "The first week in the hospital, he asked for you every day." I stared at her. "I kept telling him you'd probably come tomorrow." She pressed both hands together. "Then tomorrow became the next day. And then I started saying you were busy." My throat tightened. "Why?" "Because every time you didn't walk through that door." She stopped. He looked at me like I had failed him. The room felt impossibly small. "So you lied." She nodded once. "Barely." I told myself it was kinder. I thought I would feel victorious hearing those words. Instead, I felt exhausted. There was no speech waiting inside me. No perfect comeback. Just years that could never be returned. I would have come. I know. I would have left work. I know. I would have sat beside him. Tears rolled down her face. I know. Ryan appeared quietly in the doorway. He had heard enough. Not everything. Enough. He looked at Mom. "Why didn't you tell us?" She didn't answer. Aunt Linda stepped into the hallway behind him. "So it was true," she whispered. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. The truth itself was loud enough. The house sold that afternoon. Mom moved into a small condominium across town. Ryan helped her. I didn't. Not because I hated her. Because neither of us knew how to stand beside the other yet. We spoke only when necessary. Birthdays, medical appointments, Christmas, careful conversations about ordinary things. Nothing more. I spent the next several weekends reading Dad's 5 letters. One each Saturday morning. I couldn't read them all at once. They weren't dramatic. He wrote about squirrels stealing tomatoes from the garden, about replacing the water heater, about missing our Sunday phone calls. One letter contained a grocery list on the back because he'd forgotten he was using good stationery. Another ended halfway through because he apparently answered the doorbell and never came back to finish it. They sounded exactly like him. Ordinary, patient, hopeful. In the final letter, written only days before he entered the hospital, he wrote something that stayed with me. Families waste too much time waiting for the perfect conversation. If you read this later than I hoped, don't waste any more. There was no blame, no anger, just my father being my father. 6 months after the house was sold, Ryan called. Want breakfast? It was the first invitation that hadn't come with a funeral, a birthday, or an obligation. We met at a little diner Dad used to like on Saturday mornings. The waitress poured coffee without asking. Ryan reached into his jacket and slid something across the table. It wasn't money. It wasn't paperwork. It was an old photograph. Dad stood between us at a county fair. Ryan couldn't have been more than 12. I was holding a paper bag full of kettle corn. Dad had one hand on each of our shoulders. On the back, in his handwriting, were 4 simple words. My boys, finally smiling. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then Ryan smiled. A real one. So, same time next Saturday? I looked out the window. The parking lot was filling with families starting their weekend. For the first time since my father's funeral, I didn't feel like I was carrying unanswered questions. Only someone worth remembering. I turned the photograph over one last time before slipping it carefully into my wallet. Then I nodded. Yeah, next Saturday. Almost a year passed before my mother called without a holiday or a practical reason. There's one more box, she said. I think it belongs to you. I almost told her to donate it. Instead, I drove over on a rainy Tuesday after work. The box wasn't in her living room. It was sitting in the hall closet, pushed against the back wall. She didn't even open it. I couldn't. Inside were things no one would ever fight over. Dad's old baseball cap, a flashlight that no longer worked, 3 measuring tapes, a deck of playing cards with 2 missing queens, and a dented metal lunchbox from the auto parts store where he'd worked most of his life. It was heavier than it looked. When I opened it, I laughed out loud. Mom frowned. What? I turned the lunchbox toward her. Dad had hidden nearly $50 in loose change inside. Quarters, dimes, nickels, even a handful of pennies. Under the coins was a folded note. Only one sentence. Emergency cheeseburger fund. Don't tell your mother. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then, unexpectedly, Mom laughed. Not politely. Not because she thought she should. A real laugh. She covered her mouth and shook her head. He'd stop for burgers every Friday, she said. He always claimed they were on sale. I smiled. They probably weren't. No, they definitely weren't. We both laughed again. It was the first time in years that the silence between us wasn't carrying blame. As I stood to leave, Mom quietly said, I've spent a long time wishing I could change those last weeks. I looked at the lunchbox in my hands. So have I. She nodded. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know. I just wanted you to know that I think about him every single day. I never doubted that. She looked surprised. I only doubted the choices you made. She didn't argue, because there wasn't anything left to defend. That Friday, Ryan and I kept an old promise neither of us knew we'd made. We drove to the little roadside diner Dad used to disappear to after work. We ordered cheeseburgers, paid with quarters from Dad's emergency fund. The teenage cashier looked at the pile of coins and smiled. You guys been saving these forever? Ryan looked at me. I looked at the lunchbox resting on the seat beside us. Then I smiled back. You could say that. Some things are too heavy to carry forever. Sometimes they fit inside a dented old lunchbox. And sometimes, after years of silence, they finally become light enough to share.